All right, tonight we're down in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8, where it starts out, you husbands. Now, we've come to the conclusion of a section of where he's talking about being in subjection, citizens being in subjection to the government. Now, stop to think, at that time, the people he's writing to, Nero is the emperor, and how horrible that the government was. You can think about our government, about all that you want to, but when you study about Rome at that period of history, why, it was just a totally corrupt government. And so the tendency is just to throw it away and say, I'm not going to have anything to do with it, I'll fight it, or whatever it is. And so he tells the Christians, be in subjection. Then they had slavery. And so he's talking to the slaves. And in my mind, if there's ever a time when a person would say, I'm rebelling, I'm running away, I'm going to fight, I'm going to do something, it would be if some other human being took you in as a slave and beat you and made you lesser than a human, treated you lesser than a human, and all you were good for was just to make that person happy. So he tells them then what to do about that situation. The Bible deals with problems that they faced at that time, and he's telling those Christians how to react at that time. And it wasn't by rebellion and fighting, but it was by subjection. And finally, the religion of Christ, the influence of Christianity, is the thing that has swept away the nations that have done away with slavery. Then it is husband and wife. And of course, the women were treated in a very terrible way. And again, the tendency would be in this rebellion. And so again, he says, be in subjection. And if there's any way that you might be able to convert your disorderly, ungodly husband, it is by being in subjection to him and then living a godly life. Now, here it is, he comes to husbands. Now, he's not going to tell husbands to be in subjection. So you say, why did he put in husbands then down here as this fourth category? Well, it appears to me that the thing that he's doing is making sure that the wife receives the protection that Christ would have her to receive. Making sure that a husband doesn't read what he said about wives, be in subjection, and think that that just gives him the license to mistreat her in any way that he wants to do it. So now then, he's going to tell husbands their obligation toward their wives. So he starts out then, and he says, now you husbands, in like manner. Now, this in like manner, this is what he started with each time. Just like I have told these other people to do this and this and this, now then I'm telling you also, just like I told them, that here now is how you're to treat your wife in here. He says, dwell with your wives according to knowledge. That could well be the biggest statement that was ever uttered in family relationships. There have been books, thousands of books that are written about family relationship. And yet when God teaches on that subject and when he comes to the husband, he puts it in those few powerful words. And he says, dwell with your wives according to knowledge. Now the word dwell there is kind of an interesting word. It's a word that you would expect that it means live in the house with. You dwell in the house. It's a household word. So you dwell with your wife here in this marriage in the house, and you do it according to knowledge. Now, as you think about how big this statement is, I guess you might think about it in this way. I use an example. I'll just use an example. It's about the best one that I know how to use, or I wouldn't use it there. But when a man looks at a woman, you're looking at a strange thing, aren't you? I mean, how in the world can a woman think the way they think? You know, it makes you scratch your head. And you say, it just can't be that way, you know. Are they trying to cause me problems, or do they actually think that way? Now, I understand women. I understand what you think about us. We're talking about you right now. Now, as men look at that, they say, what would make a woman think like that? Now, God tells us that we're to live with them according to knowledge. What does that little statement say before we go any farther? Live with them according to knowledge. And here it is. I can't figure out, to save my life, why my wife thinks like she thinks. What did God tell me to do? Figure it out. That's what that means. It means figure it out. Do it according to knowledge. But you say, I've thought about it and I can't figure it out. Then what do? You figure it out. You keep going. You keep getting the help that you need to get. I use an illustration about an animal that I don't know anything about. Suppose that there was somebody that came in here and he brought in a kangaroo. And he turned this kangaroo loose in here and he says, now, here it is, I'm going to leave you people with the kangaroo. And I'm going to come back in a year or in 5 years. He sets the time. And if this kangaroo is happy and healthy, I'm going to reward you with $1 million for each one of you. But if that kangaroo is not happy and that kangaroo is not healthy, then I want to put you to death. You got some pretty stiff things there. So the kangaroo's there. He turns around and walks away. That's what God did to us men. He gave us a wife and says, now, you live with her. You live with her according to knowledge. And if you don't, he's given us those options. I'll not even listen to your prayers, he says, if you don't. And so there's a blessing of heaven if we do, but there's a curse of God not even listening to our prayers if we don't. So it's kind of like that kangaroo. So now we got the kangaroo here. What would you suggest that we all do? See? Anybody in here know what a kangaroo eats? Do you know the temperature of a kangaroo? Do you know? And so we start on down the line about a kangaroo. And we say, I don't know anything about a kangaroo, but I do have a dog, and I know we feed our dog, and so let's feed our kangaroo dog food. What would you say if that's the attitude that I took? And you know, if I make that kangaroo sick, you're going to get killed. Would you give me some suggestions? Would you say, well, hold on, maybe better not give it dog food in here. See? And so we go around and people have suggestions. I expect all of us would come to one conclusion, wouldn't we? Let's go to the book that tells us about kangaroos. Let's find out about a kangaroo so that we can take care of that kangaroo. We don't know anything about it. It's not like a dog. It's not like a cat. It's not like a pony. It's not like anything that we have in this country. So we need to learn how to live with this kangaroo. Now, that's what we've got with this. Men and women are totally different. And he tells a man, now you have this responsibility. You have the responsibility of living with her according to knowledge. Whatever it takes for you to determine her needs, her concerns, how she thinks, how she needs to be treated, whatever it is, you live with her in that way. Now that is a big order. Now, I know that if we were going to be talking about it, we'd preach 100 sermons on it. This is all he tells us. According to knowledge. According to knowledge. So, we have to learn then about men and women. Now, I'm just going to real quickly, you've all seen this chart that I put up here. But as you begin looking at a human being, when God made man, he made man with 4 parts. And we find these 4 parts in Jesus himself in Luke chapter 2, verse 52. Man has a body, he has a mind, he has a spirit, and he's a social person. And when it describes Jesus, why, it shows Jesus advanced in all of these realms. So as you look now at a man, I'm talking about the male, there is what you find in him. That is what God created when he did that. Now, not only did he create then the male, but then he also created the female. And the female is to be the answer to man's problems. So he gave the female a body, just like he gave man. But how different is the female body from the male body? See? Just diametrically opposed, isn't it? I mean, it's just totally different. God gave her a different body to fill the needs of the other body that's there, to give what is lacking in that. Then God gave man a mind. And then he also gave a woman a mind. Now, that's where we're talking about how do you figure it out? Well, just kind of just a little joke in here. An artist said, here's what it is. If you're trying to figure out the mind of a man, there's an instrument right there. It's got one button on it. You just push it on, turn it on, push it, and it turns it off. That's the kind of mind that a man has. There's a woman's mind. And you got to start cranking them around that's in there. Now, her mind is totally different than a man's mind. That's the all that I'm wanting to make right now. As a social being, totally different than a man. Now, the only thing that I know of that is equal with man and woman is spirit. That we're both spiritual beings, both totally equal in that respect. But in the other three parts, we're different. See, we're different. It doesn't mean one is better than the other one. It just means we're different from each other. And keep in mind that it was God that says, after he made man, he said it's not good that man should be alone. In other words, God said, if I leave man, the male, the way it is right here, that's not a good part of creation. God says it would not be good. Everything else God created, he looked at it and he said it's good. But when he looked at man, he says it's not good. Now that's not really what he said. When he created man, it was good, but when he created him, he says it's not good. Now you finish the rest of it. What does it say? To be alone. Now if I leave him that way, then I've got a creation that's not good. So I'm going to make a helpmeet or an answer to his problem. So the woman then, he created in every way to be the answer to every problem that a man has. And it's when man and woman then dwell together the way they should that they can live a happy, charming life upon this earth. Now, looking at it in this way, it becomes more complicated if we put it together. You take, in a marriage, you've got two bodies, two minds, two social beings, two spirits dwelling together. Now, these 8 different pieces that are different, they all become one. And so it's a complicated thing. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, marriage, the dwelling of a man and woman together, is a complicated thing. Now, it's not our purpose tonight to talk about marriage. But what I'm telling you is that Peter says, you dwell with her according to knowledge. So, us men have that responsibility. He didn't say, women, dwell with your husbands according to knowledge and try to urge them and command them. Have you ever noticed that when God gives a command, that he gives a command because he knows there is a weakness in there? That's the only time that he gives a command, is when he knows that there is a weakness involved in there. When God talked to a man, he said, now, love your wives. Love your wives. That's the weakness a man has. When he talks to a woman, be in subjection to your husband. That is a problem throughout the history of mankind. Children. What's a problem with children? What's a major problem with children? As they grow up, from the time you bring them home, it's obey, see? It's obeying from different degrees as they go through. But obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. He gives us those commands to warn us against things that are wrong so we can live a happy life. So now then he says, men, it's your responsibility to figure it out. You live with her according to knowledge. Now, let's go back here and read it here. You husbands in like manner dwell with your wives according to knowledge, giving honor unto the woman as unto the weaker vessel. Now, as it's talking about the weaker vessel, I've heard people try to explain it in many, many different ways, trying to get around the fact that there might be a way in which a woman is weaker than a man. And the only way that I know that you come back to it again is just that which is very obvious, that she is physically weaker than you are. That as you're living with your wife, you're living with another person who is physically weaker than you are. Now, what is the tendency of when you have people that are large and powerful, and they're associated with people that are not that large and not that powerful? What's the tendency? Is it for the big guy to submit to the little guy, or is it for the big guy to tell the little guy, knock it off, this is what we're going to do? See? When it's nations, the same way is there. So the tendency is then that man has the physical power to control her, but you remember you live with her according to knowledge, and one part of that is for you to always take into account she is a weaker vessel. So you learn how to live with that weaker vessel. And then in order to show us, when you say, well, I know she's weaker, so I can beat up on her, okay, and like this. Then the next thing he says is in here then, as unto weaker vessel, as being also joint heirs of the grace of life. So you remember, she's every bit as important as you are. That you have no superiority in the eyes of God over her. You are both joint heirs. You are equal. You're co-inheritors is what that word actually says. You're co-inheritors. You're equal in your inheritance as you go before God. So keep that in mind. You're stronger than she is here, but you're going to stand before God that lets you know she is your co-inheritor. Now, you keep these things in mind, he says in here, for a particular reason, that your prayers be not hindered. The word hindered means cut in or interrupted. Now, this really puts some emphasis on how we are to act. So oftentimes, in family relationships, family, husband and wife can argue, fight, and do everything else and, until they come out in public. But then when they go back home, why, fight and argue and do this and do that and so forth. There. But now he said, here's what I want you to understand. Unless you husbands do what I'm telling you to do, unless you live with her according to knowledge, unless you treat her as the weaker vessel, understand she is the weaker vessel, and that gives you certain responsibilities that you're going to have to carry, unless you understand she is of equal value with you, God says your prayers will be cut off. Now, that's kind of scary. You can say, well, I see why that would be if a man went out and committed adultery. God wouldn't listen to his prayers. Or if a man turns into a bank robber, or if, and some of these big things. But what he says is, if you don't learn how to live with her according to knowledge, treat her the way you should, God says, I'll not hear your prayers. And that really puts the emphasis on how important this really is. Yeah. Women are to be in subjection to their husbands, but men have that awesome responsibility as the head of that family to treat her the way God would have her to be treated, and if not, we're going to be responsible. God says, I'll not even listen to your prayers. So in a very short verse, Peter then deals with the husband relationship. Then in verse 8 he says, finally. Now, as you talk about finally, that word means now to the end. Now we're coming to the last things I want to say. In other words, I'm going to conclude what I'm going to say now, is what he's saying. I've told you what to do with the government. I've told you what to do with your master. I've told you what to do, wives, with your husband. I've told you, husbands, what to do. Now then, finally, let's conclude. I'm going to give you something else. Finally, I'm going to talk to all of you in here. So he said, means everyone in here. Going to give you the instructions. Be of one mind. Be unified. Be of one mind. Now this is more than just a husband and wife, but it's the whole church now. Now in the whole church, you be in unity. You be of one mind. And then having compassion for one another. The word compassion means sympathies. That really is a Greek word. Sympathy is a Greek word. And it means feeling the same as. It means that you can be touched with the feelings of the other person and that you feel their feelings. We hear that said quite a lot today. I know your feelings. I feel your feelings. Well, that's what this word means. Let's feel the feelings of other people in our relationship with one to the other. Husbands need to feel the feelings of the wife. But in a congregation, we need to feel the feelings of each other. Because in the church, there's every degree of problem that you can possibly think of, isn't there? You see? Every degree of problem that you can possibly think of. Starting here, coming, people hurting, some people hurting a little, some people hurting a lot, and all these kind of problems. We need to learn to feel the hurt with these other people. As Paul said in other places, rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep. Feeling the feelings. When people are happy and rejoicing, let's feel that with them. Let's be happy. But when people are weeping and they're hurting, let's have those feelings and treat them in that way. And then love as brothers. That's the word philos, which means the feeling, the emotional type love. We're to have that emotional type love one for the other. Be tenderhearted. Kind of an interesting word. The Greek word for that is strong bowels. Have strong bowels. Way back before Christ, in classical Greek, that word meant brave. They use it for brave. That is, go into fight and have strong bowels. Don't wimp out. Don't wimp out. But then it came to me, having a strong bowels, is having this inward feeling. It meant compassion or good-hearted. Be good-hearted. Have sympathies. Love the brethren. And be good-hearted toward them. There. Be courteous. It's translated. That word courteous is really humble. Humble-minded is the word. It means assign yourself to a lower rank. Learn how to think of yourself lesser than another person rather than higher than another person. Assign yourself down in that lower rank is the idea there. And then he says, not returning evil for evil. When somebody does something bad to you, don't you do something bad to them. The word literally means not giving back. That's what it is. As children we'll say, I pay you back. Well, that's what this word means, not giving back. Don't give back that which is base or wrong or wicked. If somebody does something to you, don't you pay them back. Don't you act that way toward them. Then he says, or reviling for reviling. The word reviling means reproach or heap abuse upon, rail, talk ugly about somebody. Don't do that. But on the contrary, do just opposite. Speak good about. Now, none of us have to be taught to speak good about somebody who does you good. You're all grins, you're thank you talk about what a nice person that is. But what God is doing is giving us instructions about how we are to live here, and that is, he said, when somebody does you evil, then instead of you reviling them, you speak good about them. You speak good. Knowing that you were called to this. Now he said, this is the reason you were called. You're called out of the world. The world does all these bad things. But God called you out of the world to be this kind of a person, knowing that you were called to this. You were called to this kind of life. He called you to be this type of an individual that you may inherit a blessing, that you may be blessed, you may be spoken good about, you may be praised, that you may get that great inheritance that comes from man and from God. Yeah, Dave?
Lowell, I'm speaking good about, what if there is an individual that just treats everybody mean, he's just that way, and there's almost nothing good to say about him? How do you speak good about that person?
How can you feel good about that person?
Good about him.
Be good about him? That's what he says to do. See,
There's nothing good to say about him.
yeah, there's nothing good to say, so we probably shouldn't be saying.
So be silent on that.
Should probably be silent. We need a lot more silence than what we have. See, not a lot more silence than what we have. That is for sure. Now, this right here, I think it's talking about the normal avenues of life. And what you've asked me, Dave, is you've taken it down to the nth degree down here, where there is a totally rotten individual that has no good about them whatsoever. See, what do we do about that individual that's there? Now, we got this problem that you have to hold people responsible for their actions. See, and in order to hold them responsible for the actions, well, you have to say this guy did this and this guy did that and he did this. You see, there. But we're talking about in normal relationships in here. This is how you treat people. When they treat you mean, you treat them good. You see, I think he's next, then you're.
Isn't that kind of an enabling philosophy there? I mean, you're encouraging a bully, or sometimes even a verbal bully, because they're successful on it. They don't get challenged. They don't get called on it. You don't come out against them. You're just supposed to be quiet, take it. I mean, you're encouraging.
No.
You're encouraging a wrong behavior there, aren't you?
No, I don't think this is what this is talking about. As I told him, people have to be held responsible for actions. And there's a big difference that if I do you evil, of you going away and start talking about that dirty, rotten, low-down Lowell, see? And you coming to me and say, Lowell, now you did this to me and you know that it's not true, see? And so you're going to hold me responsible for this thing, see? So surely the Lord says, go to your brethren, talk to them, see? And we're to hold people responsible. But what he's talking about here is when people do evil to you just in the normal way of life, don't go around solving that problem by talking about them and saying ugly things. Try to say something nice. If you'll say, oh, when I do this horrible thing to you, and somebody comes up and says, boy, isn't Lowell a horrible person for what he did to you? Yeah. You might say, yeah, but you know, Lowell has good quality. I remember one time he helped a cat or something. You might try to find something good to say. Now, when you can, you hold me responsible. See? You hold me responsible when you can. But there are many times when people do you evil that there's nothing you can do. What do you do with one of your coworkers? They slacken off in work and they cuss you out and they do something. What do you do? Are you going to fire them? No, you don't have the authority. You going to go turn them in? Well, if that will work, you can go say, this is what this person did. That's not speaking evil against them. That's telling what they actually did. But you know that everybody does it. You've seen it before. Nothing is going to happen. What are you going to do? Well, I tell you what you can do is say something good to them. Say something nice. And if you do this, what is it that the proverb has said that that a soft answer turneth away wrath. See? And, and this is what he's telling us to do in these cases here. Jordan?
I was just going to say, no matter how bad they get, you still have the ability to either wish evil upon them or wish good upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they've done absolutely nothing good that you've seen, you can still hope that good happens to them instead of saying, well, I hope that, everything just goes bad for them.
Mm-hmm.
You can still say good things in that I hope that things turn around for them,
Mhm.
they get better, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can do that. But people have to be held responsible for the evil that they do. I mean, that's the reason we have policemen out there. I hope the criminals get caught tonight. I hope they get thrown in jail, you see, and so forth and so on. But God has given a system to take care of most of these things that we've got. It's not my responsibility to take care of the criminal element. I might pick up the phone and call them in, but it's God said I've set up the government to do this particular thing. So what do I do then as somebody is doing evil to me is I'm not going to turn around and just pay them back and try to do evil to them.
But God says vengeance is mine.
God said vengeance is mine. Mhm. Let him do it.
We're talking about a relationship with everybody, not just Christian to Christian or Christian to heathen.
I think here, as I would read this, I think he's talking about in the church.
All of you live in
Yeah,
harmony.
yeah, I think he's talking about the church here. See, the brethren here. He's talking about husband and wife. He's talking about this. Now that he's talking about all of you. See, you do this. And as you look up there, love as brothers. You see here. So I don't think he's talking about Saddam Hussein. See, that's here. God has a system for him that's in there. Do you think that he should be put to death? Yeah. See, I think he should be put to death for all the criminal activity that he has done. But that's far from saying casting curses upon him. What would happen if I lived back there with Saddam Hussein and he was doing all those things, and I walk in and I say, Saddam, you dirty low-down rat, you... My head would be over there. Yeah. See, it'd be over there. But what he's saying is, I think he's talking to the church here, just telling us in your normal, everyday activity, here's how you treat each other. This is family activity. See, family activity that we've got. Okay. Then, now he's going to give us proof. He's going to give proof that Christians should refrain from all wrongdoing and evil speaking, just like he's been teaching in these various verses. So here's what he says. Now, he that would love life and see good days. Okay, everybody would like this. Now, he's quoting Psalms 34. If you love life and you want to see good days, you want to be happy upon this earth, there's a way that you go about it. And he just got through telling us about it in here. He's quoting this verse to show us, but he's given us instruction that if you want to get along with the government, what do? Obey the government. If you're a slave and you want to get along in life and you don't want to get beatings and you want to be able to be happy, what do? You obey your master. Now, he's going to cause you a lot of pain, but what's going to happen to you if you don't obey your master? See? And in the marriage relationship, the same thing is true. Nothing could be more miserable than an unhappy marriage. Now, he who would love life and see good days, if you want to do this, he quotes the psalmist saying in here. Now, I point out there is a love of life that will destroy you. What is the love of life that will destroy you? If you love your physical life more than your spiritual life, and if there's a decision to be made to where you either sacrifice your physical life or your spiritual life, you better not love your physical life. You better love your spiritual life more. But this is talking about if you want to live in this world in a happy way and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Now, this is what's called Hebrew parallelism. It's a Hebrew type of poetry. It's where you say one thing in one set of words, you go back and say the same thing in another set of words. And the Old Testament is full of this. So let him refrain his tongue from evil, his lips, let they speak no deceit. He's telling us, watch your tongue. Now the word refrain means to cease or leave off. Leave off evil. Don't speak evil. And don't speak guile. That means deceit or guile or craftiness. Be truthful. So you want to be happy? You want to see good days? Why, don't speak evil things and don't lie. Don't be deceitful. Let him turn away from evil and do good. I didn't put anything up there to that because that's self-explanatory. Turn away from everything that is bad, that is not right, and turn to that which is good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. Now, seek. It means to seek after or strive for. If you're seeking for something, you strive for it. Pursue means run swiftly, earnestly endeavor to acquire. So you don't just try to seek something, but you really pursue it. You chase it. You want to have it. And peace. Now, if you want to have a happy life in this earth, be a peacemaker. Be at peace. Anytime that you're not at peace, your life is going to be in a turmoil. It's going to be upheaval. Here. So do everything in your ability. Now, Paul's told us in the Roman letter in chapter 5, chapter 12, down I think about verse 19, he tells us how far we should go to be at peace. What does he say? As much as in you lieth, with every fiber of your being. See, every fiber of your being. Jesus said something about peacemaker in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. There's spiritual blessings in it. But if you want to live a happy life here, you do everything you can do in your power to be at peace. And the reason for this, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. Now this again is Hebrew parallelism. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. God's eyes are looking down on righteous people and saying, here are the righteous people, and he takes into account who you are. You're going to be blessed for being righteous. And his ears are open to their prayers. God will hear the prayers of a righteous person. So you want to be happy in this life? Live the kind of life where you've turned away from all evil. You don't use your tongue to speak bad things. You seek peace and understand that the Lord is looking down on you. He'll bless you. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now, the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. In Isaiah 59:1, remember what Isaiah said when God was cursing Israel and God wouldn't listen to Israel's prayers? And Isaiah said, it's not because his ears are dull of hearing. It's not because he can't hear what you're saying. And it's not because his arm is shortened, his arm is curled up, his arm is crippled in some way, so God doesn't have any strength. It's not because God can't hear you, and it's not because he can't do anything about it. What is it? What keeps him from this? But your sins have separated between you and your God. That's what this means in here. That he's going to look, the face of his Lord is against those. It's opposite those. The sacrifice of wicked people, he says, are even an abomination in Proverbs chapter 28. So if you want to have a happy life, here's what you do. It's the secret to a happy life. Now, the rest of this chapter is going to deal with the sufferings that Christians were having to endure at that time. Keep in mind, Peter is writing to Christians under a period of persecution. And he brings this up over and over and over. Now in verses 13 through 17, here he tells how to deal with the suffering. Then starting in verse 18, he uses Christ as our example for suffering. So tonight, let's look at the first part here, how to deal with suffering as you're suffering in this life. So here's how you deal with it in here. First, he deals with the condition you're to avoid. He said, now here's what I don't want you to do. Don't get in this negative mode. Don't do a certain thing that's in here. So he says in here, and who is he that will harm you if you be zealous of that which is good? But if you suffer for righteousness' sake, blessed are ye. Now, when he says, but who is he that will harm you if you be zealous for that which is good? This is a general statement. It's not an absolute statement. Did Paul have to suffer for doing evil, for doing good? For doing good, he had to suffer. Did Jesus have to suffer for doing evil or for doing good? For doing good. Sometimes good people who do good things have to suffer for it. But that's not the general plan. That's not the normal way that it works. It's a rhetorical question, that if you want to live this happy life, who is he that will harm you if ye be zealous of that which is good? It's just a rhetorical question. When's the last time you heard of somebody that was harmed because they were really good? See? And people says, they're really good, so I'm going to harm you for it. You see, in some way. So, no, people generally don't have to suffer when they do good. Once in a while, they do. And verse 14, he tells us this. He says, but sometimes you do. But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, blessed are you. So he said, generally speaking, you don't suffer if you do good, but there are times of when you will suffer if you do good. And verse 14 is kind of an interesting thing in the Greek language. You remember, I've told you a few times that in Greek, when you use the word if, if it's snowing outside or if, that sometimes it shows doubt. Well, if it snows next week, we won't have class. There's a doubt in there. If somebody comes in right now and says, hey, it's snowing there, and I said, well, if it's snowing, we better cancel class. Then when I used if, I meant since it's snowing, see? Now, there's 4 different kinds of sentences, and it's the way you put them together, and I'm not going to get into that. This is the 4th class conditional sentence. The 4th class conditional sentence is very, very seldom used in the New Testament. And the reason, because it's so far out. And here's what it means. When you say, well, if it snows next week, and if you put it together in this way, it means if it snows next week, the chances of it snowing next week, let's suppose we're July the 15th. This time of the year it probably will snow, but July the 15th, I'm in class, and I said, now if it snows next week, we won't have class. See? But you would understand, well, Lowell's just kind of making a joke out of that, see? And so if the aliens come, if aliens land next week, I want to go see them, I don't want to have class. Now, what's the possibilities, you see, the way I'm saying it that's in here? You'd understand, I'm not saying I think the aliens will land. I'm putting it out. So it's a far out. So it's like, if you should, which is so far away from the normal that it can happen, but the probability is just almost nil. But if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, like Paul and Jesus, blessed are you. And so that's the way that Peter puts it there. Generally speaking, you don't, but if you should, blessed are you. Then there. And then he says, not only blessed are you, by the way, what did Jesus say on the Sermon on the Mount? That when people persecute you and curse you, what do? You jump with joy, see? Because you're going to be blessed by God. Now, it's a fourth-class conditional sentence. Then, fear not their fear. Now, this could mean one of two things. I'm going to tell you the one I think that it means. I think it means that you take these people that's causing fear, that they're going around and they're causing trouble. Now, don't you catch on to them and be afraid like they're trying to make you afraid. Don't let the fear that they're trying to heap on you take effect. Don't live a life of fear like they're trying to get you to live. Don't fear their fear. Don't accept what they're trying to do with you and go through life being scared to death, is the point here that he's making in here. Now, there's another thing that it could mean. Don't fear their fear can mean these people who are heaping this fear upon you, they themselves are afraid. They're scared. Don't you fear the way they fear. See? Don't you fear the way they fear. A lot of times, if you take a bully in any realm, why do they do what they do? Is it because they're happy and contented? Or do they heap reproach upon somebody because they're afraid that they're going to lose their happiness or lose whatever it is? Don't you fall into fearing the kind of fear that they have. It can mean that by reading it, but I think that it probably means this other. Don't you fall into the realm of letting them scare you and cause you to live a life of fear. See, that's there. Okay, now then, in verse 15, he says, but. Now, as we look at this, or be troubled means agitate, cause commotion there. Now, secondly, he deals with what you do in a positive way. All right, sanctifying your heart, Christ as Lord. I like to illustrate this in this way. That sanctifying your hearts, Christ as Lord. Sanctify means to set apart. And so I say, okay, in your brain somewhere, you set apart one thing. You set apart one thing. It's never to be tampered with. Anything else, it might be negotiable. You might argue about, you might do something, but here's something now that is set apart and it's not to be tampered with. And that is Christ is Lord. That's what you put in there. Christ is my Lord. That's non-negotiable, not to be tampered with. That's it. That's how I'm going to go through my life. So, sanctify in your heart Christ as Lord. Then, he says, do this. Be ready always to give an answer or a defense. The word there's an apology. It's a defense. To defend, to give an answer in here. And what are you to give an answer to? Being ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason concerning the hope that is in you, yet with meekness and fear. So be ready to give an answer to every man the reason for your hope. The reason for your hope could be summarized as you go through really in this. The resurrection of Jesus Christ. Why do I believe that Jesus is the Christ? Why do I believe that I should serve Him as my Lord? Why do I believe that I should be willing to die for Him and give up my life? It all goes back to because He was resurrected from the dead, which proves He is the Son of God. You remember back in chapter 1 when we dealt with that in the first few verses? Right? That is the foundation. That's the foundation. So when somebody say, why are you the kind of person you should be? When you serve Christ, it costs you a lot of money, costs you a lot of time. You can't do certain things. Why do you do this? Be ready to give Him an answer of why you do it. Then your attitude. He said, make sure you have the right attitude. When you give your defense, you give it with meekness and fear. You give it with meekness and fear there. Now, the word meekness means gentle, kind, submissive, not thinking of yourself in a haughty way, but give it to them in a gentle way, rather than in a haughty way of looking down upon them, and then give it to them in fear. Now, I would suppose that would have to mean, the only thing I can think of, when I'm giving an answer to people that want to know about why I am what I am, I'm afraid, due to my weakness, that I might not do it properly. I better be careful. I better not just go into it, oh yeah, I'll handle this thing, yeah, you bet you, I can, like this, with a cocky, egotistical attitude. No, go into it talking to the other person as though they're a person. Be gentle with them. And then you have a fear that you might not do it the way it should be done. Now, if you have that fear, it's not talking about just scared to death and can't do it, but it's talking about a fear that you might not do it right. It'll cause you to be a better teacher. One of the things Scott and I, we were talking last week, and he's talking about these sermons that are coming up on. He's talking about, he said, he said, it just scares me to death. He said, that it scares me when I'm preaching that I might not do it right. And he said, in fact, every time I get up to preach it, I have fear. I said, well, I'm glad to hear that. I do too. I do too. And we talked about it. That's what makes you put the final touches on it. That's what makes you really put an effort forth of, will I do this right? Or will I let my personality, my egotism, my haughtiness get in the way so that people can't really hear the truth? So when you're giving a person an answer of why you are what you are, you then do it with meekness and fear. Then your lifestyle is a big thing. Lifestyle is in this, he says, and having a good conscience, here, that wherein you are spoken against, they may be put to shame who revile your good manner of life in Christ. So, having a good conscience, it's tied in with the good life you have in Christ. Now, if I tell you that I have a good conscience, what's that telling you? Stop thinking. Can you tell me what that tells you if I tell you tonight, I have a good conscience? What am I really saying? I'm saying quite a lot. A conscience is that which makes you feel good when you do what you believe is right. It makes you feel bad when you do what you believe is wrong. So when I say, my conscience hurts me, what do you know about me? I've done something that I think is wrong. But if I tell you I have a good conscience, what does that tell you? I'm living a life that I think I should be living. So you live the life that you think you should be living, and he says then, so that when they see your good manner of life, then they will be put to shame when they revile you, because they see that good manner of life you have. So there's how you deal with this suffering then. It's there. Okay, next week we'll start in then with this. Christ is our example, and we'll see then what it's talking about in that realm. Okay, class dismissed.